Hello, hello, and welcome to Keybard. I'm Thembi, and today I am so excited to talk with Sam Lewis from MadeBySam.com. Now, Sam Lewis is an omni-media artist and designer. Omni-media is a quaint way of saying that if he has heard of it and can get his hands on it, he will absolutely try to make something interesting out of it. Now, among Sam's artistic pursuits are corset making, leatherworking, quilting, furniture making, blacksmithing, costuming, prop making, and set design. He most recently designed and built the sets and props for a jazz nutcracker production in Austin, Texas, and is currently designing and sewing costumes for a personal neo-Victorian project. Up until COVID wreaked havoc on the art scene, he was co-founder and manager of St. Elmo's Soundstage, a film, video, and audio studio in Austin, Texas. Since COVID, Sam's focus has shifted to personal photo and video projects with an emphasis on teaching and inspirational messaging. He is also the producer of the podcast Fine Beats and Cheeses, which celebrates not so guilty pleasures. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. Let's jump in. You work with a lot of different materials, but just about everything that you do does involve working with your hands. So tell us about your earliest memory of craftsmanship.
It's kind of funny. I was thinking about that, and I don't know that I have any memories that don't involve making things. My parents are both very scientific in professional orientation, but very artistic in temperament. So both were musicians, both were artists of some degree, although my father considered himself a craftsman. He was a woodworker in his spare time. So one of my earliest memories, period, is of being down in my dad's basement shop trying to figure out how saws worked. And and I couldn't have been more than close supervision.
I had an image of a little 4-year-old like, what's this about?
No, there was teaching involved.
Yeah. Okay, so as a young child, you were exposed to craftsmanship. You had it in your home, you had it all around you. So you had access to gaining an understanding of how these things work.
Yeah, and my dad's philosophy more or less was, if you want it, make it. We didn't have a whole lot of money, but within that there were a decent amount of tools. There was a wherewithal, and very, very early on, and this is something that I'm kind of trying to put out into the world, it was drilled into me that anything that you can see, that you can touch, was made by somebody. So things can be made, things can be fixed, things can be changed, things can be, made yours. You don't have to go to the store. You don't have to throw things away.
That's very empowering and anti-capitalist in its foundation. I love that.
I had no idea until recently how anti-capitalist everything in my upbringing actually was.
That's great. So you found your way to theater. Can you talk a little bit about how you went from craftsmanship to theater, or was it just always there?
Theater has it's always been, making things was the thing that interests me. Then sort of my intro to theater was through independent movies and independent films. And back when they were film, not digital, you get used to people with no budget going like, hey, can you make me a thus and such? And you're like, what's your budget? I got a candy bar.
Did you still make it?
If it was interesting enough, that's always been my role. If it's cool enough, I'll figure it out. And then very quickly, if it's cool enough and I'm not out of pocket, I'll figure it out.
That's good. Those are some good parameters to set. So, okay, for our listeners who aren't theater practitioners, theater production teams usually will include several designers among director, production manager, other folks. And they design set, lighting, sound, costumes, props, sometimes projections. And you work in several of these areas, not just one. So I want to talk a little bit about each one. I want to start with theater set design. What is your process for designing a set, beginning from where you read the script or you hear the director's concept? How do you go about taking a set from an idea to a full model?
Well, I've had the luxury in my life of, ironically, coming in not at the very beginning of projects, but once the project has sort of been roughly fleshed out, so people have an idea what they want. in the instances where I'm designing from the get-go, most of what I do is, and this comes from the film world, which is everything is in service of the story. So, a director will go like, okay, we want these huge sets. And I'm like, okay, but it's an Ibsen play. Like people do these with no sense whatsoever. Does the set
Hmm.
add things? And is the money you're about to spend, which is a non-trivial amount of money, is this where you would best spend it? So I've talked myself out of more work than I've talked myself into,
Oh no.
ironically. But by design, and
Hmm.
I think people are happy, and people come back when you're like, yeah, I just saved you $20,000. It looks better. Well, now you've got something for the next go around. But every one of these jobs to me, if it involves art, if you start with, you've got a broad parameter of what the director wants it to look like. Steampunk, for instance, comes up a lot because that's what I'm kind of known for now.
Hmm.
So, people will say, they'll come to me because, I have an aesthetic that, like, hey, can you do this thing like you did that thing? Or, you want it sleek, modern. I did a bunch of design for it was the cherry orchard, but it was set in a Soviet sort of brutalist architecture of the 50s. It was fascinating. And I don't know whatever happened to the production. I did the
Hmm.
drawings, I got paid for the concept, and it's in Europe somewhere.
Oh
And I know
wow.
I've seen pictures of the set I designed, so it got
Hmm.
somewhere with it, but I kind of lost track of that. The thing that bogs theater down all the time is somewhere, somehow, somebody needs to be just in charge.
Uh,
I'm perfectly happy to be that guy, but you know, that's if you've got one artistic vision, then everything else is fairly easy. You just make things until the vision is met, or until you convince the person that their vision is insane.
well, that said, it sounds like, based on your process, you also have in the back of your head the budget aspect, right? So typically for those of the listeners who aren't theater practitioners, once again, typically you'll get paid for your actual design as a professional, but you also will have a budget for materials for the set, right? And
Yes,
yeah, and so can you talk a little?
in
I mean,
theory.
it's not right in a perfect in a perfect world, right? Ideally, you would have those things. But why don't can you say a little bit about how you get around that if it's not what you expect? Like you just said, okay, you talk to a director or production manager and you're saying, okay, hey, I just saved you 20 grand with scaling down this set kind of thing. Like so you're thinking about that bigger picture. What happens when you don't have enough funds for what the director's vision is?
The short answer is the director doesn't get what they want. The slightly more complicated answer is, what can you turn what you do have? How can you turn that to the purpose of, again, serving the story? The story, it has to be the point. And people lose that. That's why one person needs to be in charge and they have to have the story in their head.
Mm-hmm.
The wonderful thing about running a soundstage for a decade, which again lasted great until COVID meant nobody was socializing and hey, there's no income suddenly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but up until then, I would build sets and I would save sets. So, it's amazing what you can do with a couple sheets of, 2-inch thick pink insulation foam, carve it into walls, cover it, and then you can just pull it out and like, hey, this is sitting around here. You get somebody to paint it, you've got a free wall.
So
Uh,
repurposing for from project to project helps as
and
well.
again, yeah, and that's more of a indie film process than a theater process, because theater process needs to be repeatable and stronger. But by the same token, it's not that hard to take, a foam prop, cover it in fiberglass, make it strong, make it hard, make it last for, 20, 30 performances. And then, there you go.
Well, and I would assume that when you're working both in film and theater, you're able to kind of take some of the ideas and methods and even materials from one to the other sometimes, right?
Other than durability and scale, it's the same job.
Okay.
So
Yep.
you get a little bit of a break in theater because people are not going to be doing close-ups. So I don't have to have it 4K ready from a 3-inch far away close-up. You're going to be looking at it from best case scenario 15 feet away, front row of the audience. So there's, you can finagle that some. Another point about the budget is, I think people don't understand about theaters is when you start out a production, you don't have much money to play with. So most of the productions that succeed and go on, I have rebuilt entire prop sets multiple times as audiences grow, money comes in. There's a fixed budget for how much it costs to put on a production, but the idea is to make more money than that. And then you can start. So I've completely redone props multiple times for stage performances, and people will come back to me 2 years later like, hey, we've got all this, these are falling apart. I'm like, hey, congratulations, you've been using them.
Right,
Like,
right.
since
That
we're going to
means
replace
they're
them anyway,
in
can we
use.
upgrade? Like, why, yes, we absolutely can upgrade.
So depending on the project, and we touched on this a little bit, but I want to dig in a little bit. As a set designer, you talked about being a part of a project where you said, well, I did the design, I got paid for it, I did the sketches, and my set's going around Europe somewhere. Sometimes set designers will design a set and then supervise the building of it, or just even check in until it's finished being built. And other times the set designer is directly involved in the actual building of the set, because the designing of the set and the building of the set are two different stages that the set designer has a range of involvement in. Can you talk a little bit about what your preferences are and what your experiences are there?
Generally, again, because of my background in film, more than film and construction more than anything else, I tend to like it when people come to me. I would prefer to design and build on a individual basis, I guess I'd say, as opposed to, taking charge of the entire thing. I'd rather somebody come to me and go like, okay, we need a set that reflects this and this. These are the dimensions, go. So I kind of like, I'm a hybrid sort of. I'm used to being the guy people come to for the technical solution. On the other hand, I hate to this is not the slam it sounds like it is. Most set designers don't actually have a hands-on understanding of how materials work. So you get these bizarro theories that, yes, we want, and I actually had, and I made it work. But I had somebody come in, and it was right after the first Lord of the Rings movie, and they were doing, I don't even remember what the play was, to be perfectly honest, but they were doing something, and they wanted a set that looked like Rivendell. And I'm like, okay, what's your budget? Like 7,000. I'm like, yeah, I can do a
Can't
painting.
happen.
I
Right.
can do a painting. That's the budget for a painting,
Mm-hmm.
a matte painting. And we went back and forth and back and forth. And I ended up making one out of just bent aluminum framework. And it gave that airy sort of very Art Nouveau feel without taking up a lot of space or weight. So, it was doable. It was a strong compromise.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, you make me think about when you talk about not knowing how materials work, you make me think about how truly important it is to have an understanding of the flexibility, the shape, the availability of various materials when you're designing something. Because in my own experience, I had a practicum class in my undergraduate theater degree where I was to build a in this case it was a prop, but it was a sprinkler system, and the shape of the sprinkler system was designed by the designer. But when I went with my professor to go get the materials didn't come in those shapes, and it was a small detail that caused us a lot of problems because we were trying to be true to the design, but we had to solve problems to figure out how to make the shapes work. And it just goes to show that you can save the people who do the actual construction a lot of time and stress if you have an awareness of how things work, and that level of detail goes into your design, then the whole process is easier. Have you been in a situation where, I mean, you just talked about rebuilding because they were saying, we want this elaborate set and we don't have the materials, but have you ever had a situation where the materials themselves that the designer wanted just didn't work the way that they thought they worked?
Absolutely. And ironically, what you're talking about is a perfect case in point where you wanted a sprinkler system that looked thus and such. I'm like, well, let's let's you and me, designer, go to Home Depot, look what exists,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Mm-hmm.
see because usually if you couch it carefully and everybody's working towards the same goal, there's a lot of room for interpretation of that sort of thing. Because does it matter if it's inch and a quarter pipe or inch and a half pipe? Well, if your source has inch and a half pipe but not inch and a quarter, just get the inch and a half. It'll be fine. If you want something to have all these curlicues in a pipe, then I'm like, well, don't do that. One, that's not how it works. And two, that's a headache and a half. Can I
Right.
do it? Yes. Is it going to cost you? Also, yes.
Yes.
Am I
Yes.
going
And
to am I going to
is it
tack on a
serving the
pain in the butt
story?
fee?
Right. And is it serving the story? Like you said, does this particular detail serve the story?
And at the end of the day, as a set and prop guy, I almost hate saying this. It almost doesn't matter
Mm.
because what you're doing is you're providing the space and the details and the wherewithal for the actors to tell the story that the writers wrote and the director is organizing. It's your the look is fundamental to it, but at the same time, that's the one space where you have a lot of room where a wide range of outputs would be perfectly acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't pay to get too precious with your art there. Because at the end of the day, it's a collaborative piece of art, not your piece of art.
So you don't get too precious with your art.
Not in that situation.
Okay.
Like if it's my personal art, it is what it is, and that's what it is, and I'm not really interested in anybody else's opinion.
Okay, so your personal art, because it's just you, you go in the exact direction you want to go. But in the collaborative art form of theater, we have to be able to say, okay, this isn't exactly my vision, but it's close enough and it doesn't harm the
Exactly.
story. So,
Exactly. And you can't have personal skin in the game
mm,
in a production. And again, film is where I live most, but the same thing applies. You just
mm-hmm,
you do what needs to be done to get the job done because you're never going to have enough money. You're never going to have enough time. Art is compromised. That's just the nature of the beast.
art is compromise. All right. Now, you also are a costume designer.
That probably is my first love anymore in terms of the physical creation of things.
Can you talk about that, your approach to costume design and what that means to you?
Another thing where in this case my grandmother was the impetus for that when I'm gonna say 7 or 8, really young. I really wanted, and I don't remember what it was. It was a shirt or no, it was a vest of some sort. It was a cowboy vest from I think the Wild Wild West, the TV show, and I really wanted it. And my parents were like, one, where would you get one? And two, do you know how much that's going to cost? So my grandmother was like, well, let's go. And we went to Joann's. We found fabric and she showed me how to make it.
Wow.
And she made she made the front where all the pockets were, which is complicated. But then I sewed the back and it looked fairly decent. And I was, 7 or 8, so it didn't last very long before it didn't fit anymore. But by
Hmm.
golly, it stayed in my closet till I was in high school.
What did it feel like to be able to make your own clothes? I mean, I'm sure your peers were not able to create this, and they're looking at your vest like, "Oh, wow, where'd you get the vest from?" And you're like,
It's growing up in Baltimore, it wasn't a thing people thought about, to be honest. And growing up in Baltimore public schools, it wasn't something that was going to get you cred. But I had the beauty of it didn't occur to me not to do it. So, and then I got into high school, college, and realized that I can make things that other people will buy, and I can also make things for other people with different aesthetics, and that was interesting. And I tell people, and there's somewhere I didn't do it. I want to say it might have been eHow. I don't know. I did a series of like 30 different sewing things, which are floating around on YouTube, but I did them, probably 15 years ago, just how to do it. And the tagline on it was, okay, this is easier than you think.
hmm
because fundamentally it's not that complicated. One of my favorite things is like, is given enough time and energy, I can teach a monkey to do any individual thing that I do.
That's interesting, right? When you think about we just are accustomed to where we are in the evolution of our particular society. We're accustomed to if you, oh, I need a shirt, I need some pants, I need a dress. You go to the store and buy it, right? And there was a time when people made most of their clothes. We're not in that time. It is interesting to think about that. It's like it isn't that hard. Obviously, the more complicated looks, ruching darts and all, there's certain things that are going to be more complicated, but making something simple, throw some elastic in there, a button, a zipper, not so hard. But I think the artistry, when you have pieces that have the dynamic aesthetics, are going to be a little bit more
Oh,
inspired.
absolutely. And that's where I can't teach a monkey how to
Right. It's
do,
where the
how to,
special.
why to do it, which is the hard part.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I think I ever got paid real money for was making a dress for one of the court ladies at the Maryland Renaissance Festival. And I'm gonna say it was in high school, but I think it's pretty early high school. And it was she was a daughter of a neighbor that I did their lawns, and her mother knew that I did sewing, and she needed something fixed in a hurry. So literally, they got a knock on the door, and my mom was like, "So Anne's here, something about sewing something?" And I'm like, "Really? Okay." So I fixed it, the one that she had, and then I turned some things, flipped some. I modified it fairly strongly, and she's like, "Can you make one of these?" And I'm like, and here's the thing that my wife winces and cringes whenever I said, I don't see why not. Uh, I saw why not, but
Uh-huh.
by the time I saw why not, I had done it.
It
So
was too late.
yeah,
And
and that
then
opened that
yeah, that
whole
took
world
you.
of really complicated, really, custom, interesting things, which I
Mm-hmm.
love. And then years later, a friend of mine, Junie, who was in a punk country band, wanted a corset for stage work. And she had bought one, and I'll say wardrobe malfunctions were a minute by minute problem with that. So she's like, all right, you sew, you've made me some stuff. Can you make a corset? And once again, I said, I don't see why not. Like very quickly saw why not. I'm the only person I know that actually uses trigonometry and calculus on almost a daily basis.
Wow.
To design a corset roughly, not that hard. To design it to perfectly fit somebody, really very complicated.
That's where the math comes in.
That's where the math comes in.
Mm-hmm. Now, see, and then folks are saying, I'm not going to use this. I remember in trade class, I'm like, why am I learning this? I'm not using this. Had I known, I could be designing some corsets and some. I'm sure there are other items that pieces that you need that mathematics for, right?
And okay, another hobby horse of mine. I also taught and teach actually math and science, in a tutoring capacity at the moment, but I was a TA back in college. What math teaches you is how to think about things.
Hmm.
Math teaches you problem solving. Math is worth anybody can do math. I don't want to hear about, like, oh, okay, you need, yeah, I just can't do math. Yeah, you can. Nobody's taught you in a way that matches the way you look at the world, but that's a them problem, not a you problem.
Mm.
So,
It's a good point. It's a good point. Now, we talked about props a little bit earlier, and props are very important to a production, and they can even become iconic. August Wilson's piano lesson, the piano, Roxy's revolver in Chicago, Shakespeare's Hamlet's skull, right? Have you designed a prop that is memorable, like from a theater or film project? What's a memorable prop that you feel like you designed that really was essential to the storytelling?
so I've done in that range. It would be more in the little indie films, which alas, if 1,000 people had seen them, I will be pleasantly surprised. Um, but there's
But they
some direct,
exist.
yeah, and it's how you learn
That's
is you
right.
do dumb indie stuff. One iconic one that I didn't do for the movie because we ran into a money versus stuff issue. But director was coming up with this. It was an Afro-punk space opera, which was a really cool concept. He didn't really have
It
a
sounds
budget,
amazing.
and he was a music producer, not a video producer, and didn't quite. And so he wanted me to build a keyboard that was fully round, so like a circular keyboard.
Oh,
So
okay.
you sit in the middle of it, and it's keys all around.
Okay.
And came up with a number, and it was a tiny number. I'm like, I can just about get the pieces for that. I'll have to scavenge a couple of keyboards, and I think it really clever and a lot of work. So we came to a number, and I said, I will do this, but at the end of the day, at the end of the shoot, it's mine because
Mm.
you're not paying me for my, none of this pays for my labor because that's going to be hundreds of hours. He's like, well, no, I would need it for a touring instrument. I'm like, you use anything about touring instrument? I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
that's yeah, that's two orders of magnitude more than your budget. So, but I ended up later on making it because it just sounded cool. There's also a lot of in movies, at least we call them MacGuffins. So something like the briefcase in Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction,
Mm-hmm.
where it shines, you're never quite sure what's in, that sort of thing. I've done a bunch of things like that, like space opera kind of things. Those space and horror are the two big indie film things. So I have made escape pods that
Mm.
develop kind of personalities of their own. So you build them, you build with the budgets that they had. You build it out of foam, rigid structural foam. You got to be delicate with them and careful with them. So the way that you open them and close them, becomes as a function of how they're built and what they're built out of. It becomes a very individual and identifiable way of doing a thing. So like I remember with the pods, I had it was self-opening. We had some pneumatics going and but you had to unlock it one direction and then unlock it another direction and then it open, and we do it in two takes. So the first one you'd have just dry ice and a blower inside and all this steam would come flying out, and then you'd replace that, clean it out, put the actor in, and have then focus in on the actor. So it was all this stuff, but that was in all of the advertising for the movie. I get taken to film competitions and such stuff. So that one prop wasn't central to the story originally, but because it was so identifiable and different from everything else, it just sort of poof,
I
showed up
love
everywhere.
that. Yeah. I mean, you spoke a little earlier about the steampunk aesthetic. You talked about people asking you to design for Renaissance projects, Afro punk. Is there a particular aesthetic that you feel you're drawn to as an
Victoriana.
artist? Victoriana.
Yeah. In terms of, well, two different answers to that. In terms of things I build, the steampunk slash Victorian is definitely where I live in my brain because it's violently decorative. It's designed, everything about it is supposed to be aesthetically pleasing. Functionality almost comes distant second on most stuff. And that's the beginning of the industrial age. So it's at a fulcrum of interesting aesthetic versus practical. I just love that. As a strong contrast against the next one, which was where sort of stark functionalism took over, like Midwest modern and brutalism, where it's just the function is the form follows the function, and I'm like, well, that's boring and soulless, and I hate it. Whereas Victoriano was like, look at this beautiful thing, and it makes things. I'm like, I love that.
Well, and you're also a photographer. So do those themes cross over into your photography, or do you have a different sense of aesthetic
I
around food?
I take a left turn there, and I've done that since I was about 10 years old. My grandfather gave me my first real camera. There,
What was it? A Canon?
no, it was I'm a Canon guy now, but it was oh my goodness, what was it? It was a Pentax. I think it was I want to say it was a K1000. It was one of that ilk, fully
Okay.
manual, the old
Dating yourself a
bayonet.
little bit, but that's all
Oh yeah, I'm old.
right. It is what it is, you know?
Well, I've got my grandfather's was called a land camera, which is
Mm.
when you see pictures of the Civil War photographers with the big
Hmm.
bellows in front of them and I've got one of those that my grandfather built.
Are you serious?
Yep. And it works.
Oh, that's incredible. Have you taken photos with it?
I have. It costs about $20 a photo, so
Mm,
it was a beautiful training thing because it makes you think about what you're doing,
mm-hmm.
as opposed to a modern digital camera where you can just sit there and hope one of them comes out. No, you get two, three shots in an hour with a bland camera, and it costs you a great deal of time and money, and you get it right. So you stop and think about your photography, which is missing in today's landscape. And people laugh at me because when I have a photo shoot, I have I have gotten on magazine covers in a 20-minute shoot because I
Mm,
spent the hours ahead of time thinking about and conferring with art directors and what exactly are we looking at? Like do it like you did this picture and it'll be fine. And oof, got it. I know how to do that. But the old silent film into talkies, black and white film styles, the film noir, the Karsh in the photography, that highly contrasting black and white photography with those delicate, perfectly designed gradations from dark to light. That's photographically where I love to be. I just that's to me that's because it's right or it's not. It's like I hate taking pictures like in crowded space because everybody loves to, you see every Instagram and everything where you got these busy backgrounds and but if you look at the people it's supposed to be pictures of them, like, yeah, it's just whatever. Whereas if you've got, a white set and that's it, you either get an aesthetic picture out of your lighting and your subject or you don't.
mm-hmm.
And I love that.
It's interesting as I'm listening to you talk about your preferences around photography. It makes me think about again, you're talking about being young and having a camera when you're young, and just how with digital photography, it's less expensive to use digital photography, but you have less control over the artistry on the early stages of creation, right? And it's more about your editing, you're doing things with the images after, which you could back in the day, folks. Let us talk to you about what you could do in the dark room that was along the lines of Photoshop. But the idea of being able to engage fully in the artistry of photography in a way that it has shifted now with technology.
So what's kind of funny about that is camera manufacturers want you to think that.
Think
Adobe
what?
wants you to think that you don't have control.
Oh,
I I don't
uh-oh.
I have not taken any of my cameras out of full manual mode in 20 years. I control every detail of how the camera works.
Well, I'm talking about I'm sorry, I'm talking about the phones. You're right. The digital cameras,
No,
yes, but I mean like with
your phone camera,
man,
you can control every
what?
iota. I mean, you
Hold
have to
on.
go look because again,
Be right
it's
back.
automated,
Mm-hmm.
but you can do it.
What?
If nothing else, you can download anything that says so for instance, the Samsung, there's two really nice raw photo apps that let you control every single piece of that.
Really? So it
Yes.
replicates or closely replicates what it's like to have an old school
Yeah,
camera.
it is. I mean,
Okay,
it's
Sam,
limited
you
because
just hit me
the
with
sensor
game.
size is tiny.
Mm-hmm.
So it is very limited, and the lenses, even the best of lenses, and I've got as good as I can find on my camera on my phone, but they are limited compared to what a full size camera can be. Um,
But not as limiting as
but
I
it's not
thought.
as limited as it portrays it. So it's my dad always used to say, beware of idiot proofing because usually you're the idiot.
Oh.
So I'm like, okay. And I teach photography. Like everything I do, I'll teach. If you're willing to pay me my hourly, I will sit down and teach you how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's that's what I'm about now. But so the first thing I teach people is, especially with phone camera, because I'm like, like, I can't afford, $10,000 for pro. I'm like, bring your cell phone. I can get you where you want to go on your cell phone. And I teach a beginning, like 1 day course to, I have a bunch of art teacher friends down here and they used to bring their classes into the studio and we take, you know, a half a day, and we would sit there and we'd make a movie. And I'm like, every one of you is carrying in your pocket a cell phone with a camera that Alfred Hitchcock would sell his mother to have the capabilities of.
Hmm.
I'm like, you just have no technical reason not to do this. So if you want to do it, do it.
I love that. So learning how to use these tools to capture a more, like you said, leaving things on manual and really allowing that artistry to come through. Okay. All right.
But by the same token, there's nothing wrong with not.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
No,
matter of,
no.
like all art, it's a matter of how much you want to put into it. If anybody can do anything artistically, my wife and I just had, I was putting this when we were talking about this, doing this podcast, my wife and I, she's like, no, you have aptitude. I'm like, okay, everyone has aptitude, not aptitude. I'm like, but if you care enough to put the time and the energy into something, that's how you get good at it.
Mm-hmm. That's
So,
fair.
if you're the way to make good art is to make a lot of bad art. And that's the value judgment that doesn't belong in there, but it gets, it's a pithy way of making it clear. Like, yeah, I can sketch. I do pretty well at that, but man, I have done some really awful sketches too.
Mm. Now, let me ask you about AI. Speaking of
That
good,
is
bad
that is a
art.
natural transition right there. Yes.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Particularly chatbots such as ChatGPT, which you have called, and I quote, garbage in, garbage out. Talk about why you feel this way and whether you think there could be any positive outcomes from chatbots or other forms of AI.
Okay. As it stands now, there's no ethical way to use what's called generative AI, which is basically just machine learning from massive data sets because the information has to come from somewhere. And at the moment, it's just stolen off of the web. So, they're basically, it's called scraping. And there are a couple of companies that just go through everything on the web, pull it in, and then, have complicated, you know, algorithms for recombining it in whatever way you sort of tell it to do. The problem with things like Chat GPT is there is no sense to them. There's no understanding to them. What they are is sentence predictors. So, you give them a prompt and they figure out what, from this massive data set, they figure out what words ought to go in what order. But the problem is there is no discrimination within them as to what the things mean, whether they're true or not. ChatGPT has no understanding of truth, accuracy. That's not his thing. It's supposed all ChatGPT is trying to make a a believable imitation of how a human speaks. That is all that it does. Now you can try and guide how it does, but it doesn't. There's no understanding, there's no meaning. And I honestly cannot think of a single instance where ChatGPT is justified.
Well, and what about
I mean, I'm
if
open to the discussion.
well,
But
yes, I have thoughts, but I want to cover this next piece first before we go back to the text-based generative AI. So when we're talking about image-based generative AI, and you
oh,
as
there
an
I get crusty.
right, so because you create images and your images, many of them are on the internet. So when you think about how generative AI can create an image that is sourced from many, many images, including yours, how do you feel about that?
Again, it's what it is a way to make money off of stealing other people's stuff. Period, full stop. That's all there is to it. That's not an end user thing. That's the companies that are doing it. And they've done what we call the typical tech bro thing, which is find something that works perfectly fine, find a way to eliminate, any oversight, and any money that can be made, make sure it goes into your own pockets and not anybody else's. The reason I'm particularly recently irritable about it is because I have a side project, which is just it's a stupid passion project. It's called The Fool's World. And it's that's why it started out as an advertising for corsets, and I was looking for, and I had done one of the first models that worked with me on this project was a performer at a Ren fair, and she's like, I'm perfectly happy to do corset stuff. I love it. She ordered a couple, but she's like, I want to do it where I'm very not recognizable. So we put her in a full clown get up and a Victorian outfit, and people paid attention to that.
Mm-hmm.
It got like orders of magnitude more traction than anything else on my social media at the time. I'm like, oh, okay, let's do some more of these, and it got away from me. But so now, if you do a prompt and you put in a couple of words, and I'm not giving people this anymore because um stuff comes up that clearly has like identifiable models in my stuff
Mm.
in them. And I started putting up years ago, I started putting everything that I did for advertising for Fool's World had the Fool's World in a very recognizable font in bright colors as part of and now that blurred shows up all over the place. And I'm like, so yeah. And it's and I did so there's a convention where if you put a robot's text on a page, it doesn't get scooped for searches and things. And they just ignore that because it was a
Hmm.
convention. It wasn't legally binding. And basically it comes down to all this stuff comes up where artists have put time, money, energy, heart and soul into these things, and they just get yoinked. The artist never gets anything, and somebody's paying to do it.
Yeah.
And somebody's, yeah. And even aside from all that, so you can't recover from that. And the argument is, well, we can't, you can't untangle. I'm like, well, then delete it and start over. You're telling me you've stolen too much to be caught? That's the logic. No, I mean, they're gonna win because they have money because they don't pay anybody. But it's still, I'll die on this hill.
Yeah, I mean that your point is clear. There are artists and creators, writers, and folks who create content that's on the internet. It gets scraped into these algorithms, and then companies make money off of it. And the people who create it should have some benefit from this process, and they don't.
And more to the point, there's nothing that's not stolen. That's all
Mm,
that there is in there because
everything's stolen.
there was never an opt-in. They took everything, and then ex post facto, a bunch of these companies, like I've dropped a couple of companies that I loved and used, but because they changed their terms of service, but we can use these for helping generate or helping train software. I'm like, okay, that means you're using it for AI. No, no, you can't. But then also it is so unregulated and so far beyond any sort of ethical sourcing. You can identifiably come up with your own medical records on things like Chat GPT or um Midjourney is the one that I know got. Midjourney, if you do skeleton x-ray something something, it used to be they would actually pull it from medical records, x-rays. Sometimes they would have people's names on the x-rays. They would have case numbers on the x-rays still identifiable. There's no filtration, which means, it's rotten to the, to the very bottom. I don't know, really don't, I mean, if you've busted HIPAA that bad, how do you have the conversation? Like the general conversation I'm willing to have because there's stuff with, not so much generative AI, but machine learning that I use all day, every day. In photo editing software, what's called a heel brush, where basically you click on something that you want to, traditionally like a zit on a portrait, it without you having to go through and do all the things, it makes that disappear and look like the background.
Hmm.
That definitely was a machine learning thing. That's how it knows how to do it. It analyzes everything, figures out what was behind it. So there's places where it is not only useful but appropriate and necessary. But then you go to generate things, and I'm like, well, no, that's not, no, that's
Hmm.
not justifiable in my head.
So it sounds like you are comfortable with engaging with certain technologies around
I mean,
digital
my whole
media
life
and
is
things like
engaging with
that.
technology.
Mm-hmm.
The
But
problem is, so, and here's the thing, you are not entitled to make beautiful art. Nobody owes you that. And people saying like, oh, well, it lets anybody do art. No, it doesn't. It lets you steal art. But what, if it's that important to you, put the time in, learn how to do it, practice, make it. Anybody can do it. I frequently I'm like, if I can do it, anybody can do it. But you don't care enough to put the time in, then you don't care enough to get the result out. And that's fine because everybody has stuff they care about and put the time in, even if they don't realize, you know, I would say, putting the time into, Minecraft and coming up with, a fantastical, building in Minecraft, that's still, it's something you care about. It's something you invested in and you come up with something that's interesting and cool. So, I mean, that reasonably fits into the definition of art in my head. So, but if you're not if you can't sit there and draw what you just did, then okay, learn or don't, that's fine. But, just because somebody offers you a way to shortcut the effort doesn't mean you should take it.
fair enough. Fair enough. So, okay, let's
Yeah,
shift.
I'm wound a little tight on that subject, I will
No,
admit.
and you have a very clear position, which I think our listeners will be interested in hearing. I'd be interested in, what folks think of that. But you also, among the many things that you do, you produce a podcast called Fine Beats and Cheeses, which I've had the lovely honor to appear on. But I want to know, does your background at all come into play in terms of being a podcast producer?
Well, so both yes and no. Yes, in as much as, my most of my well, there's two different things. So Fine Beats and Cheeses is about non-guilty pleasures, sort of taking things that you love out of pop culture and, putting them out there like, I love this thing, even though other people think it's cheesy, which I love. And part of the reason why I'm there is that I don't engage with pop culture to that degree and on that level as Lynn and Leslie, the hosts, do. So frequently it's a completely new thing to me when we're talking. I'm like, huh, that's kind of cool. And I've found stuff I had never heard of and I quite enjoyed it. Um, so I'm kind of the idiot on the street bystander during the podcast itself. But in terms of editing I've been a photo and video editor for decades now. So that's just how that practically came to be. On the other hand, none of it matters. If I'd been moderately competent, I would probably had the job anyway, because my wife and Lynn and Leslie are the unofficial triplets. Their parents had been friends and double dated and had relationships for like a decade before they were born. They were all born 15 days apart, and I married one and got I will tell you, the vetting process of getting through the twins to get approval was hard. They have opinions about who Nikki got to date.
So once you got folded into the family, it was a done deal. You were also, did the vetting include your ability to produce the podcast?
Didn't care about that at all. That long preceded the podcast. And honestly, I was not the first producer. The first producer just didn't quite pan out. I'm
Mm.
like, why don't you let me do it? And they're like, God, and would you? I'm like, yeah, sure.
That's awesome. I love that. Okay, so what's next for you, Sam? Rest, incubation, big project. What's happening?
Well, like I said, we're about to undergo a big move, so I'm sort of wrapping projects. I got COVID, so I am in recovery mode now.
Oh.
I got what they call long COVID, which means my lungs work at about 10 to 20% of what they used to.
Mm.
So that's part of the reason I've pivoted into the more visual and less hands-on aspects of art. And so that's kind of what I'm going to focus on until that gets sorted out. And we're looking at moving across country, closer to Lynn and Leslie. Um,
Where are
and
you now?
we're in Austin, Texas, y'all.
Austin, Texas.
And that pretty much tells you why we're moving. Just
Yep.
Texas. My favorite political author ever was Molly Ivins, who was a Texas commentator in the 80s and 90s. But she's like, Texas legislature, where good ideas go to die.
There it is. So,
So
so you're
yeah,
getting ready to move. So you're resting, you're recovering, getting ready to move, but you're still creating art,
yep,
just in a way that
in a
allows
slightly
you
more
to.
sedentary way.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely going through the full, like I said, the fool's world is my opportunity to do whatever stupid thing occurs to me. So that's kind of where I'm focusing at the moment. Just editing. I got a whole bunch of backlog of things to do for that, and you got a whole bunch of new designs coming up. So that's kind of where I'm in a slight holding pattern in recovery, and optimistic about the future.
Awesome. Well, I wish you all the best, Sam. I'm so glad that you joined me today on Keyboard.
It is absolutely a pleasure, and yeah, I binged through. I'm gonna say I think all but one or two of the episodes,
Yes.
and I'm very excited for you, and
Thank
I'm
you.
I'm even more excited about the fact that Lynn and Leslie have no intention of letting you not come back.
I'm definitely coming back. I
Excellent.
love, love, love fine beats and cheeses.
Excellent. And this is I'm very pleased to be part of your podcast. Your interviewing style is calm and professional, and I love that.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, we're much more loosey goose over on Fine Beats and Cheeses. We love surprises.
Listen, and I fall right into that, you know? It's like either way, Monday, Tuesday, different vibe.
Well, anytime you feel a need for a totally startling vibe, I'll be happy to provide it for you.
I love it. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Oh, bet.
Keyboard is produced, directed, and hosted by Tim B. Duncan. Theme music by Psycho Sid. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe or follow and leave us a review or give us a rating. Your support helps Keyboard reach more listeners, and it means the world to us. Episodes drop every Tuesday. Tell a friend, tell your mama now.